When Bernard Montgomery arrived to take command of the Eighth Army in August 1942, he inherited more than a battlefield. He inherited an army that had survived disaster, retreated across the desert, and stopped only because El Alamein gave it ground where it could finally hold. The fall of Tobruk still hung over the army like smoke, and the July fighting had proved that courage alone could not overcome poor coordination, uncertain command, and piecemeal armored attacks. Montgomery's arrival matters because it marks a shift in the story of British armored warfare, from improvisation toward deliberate preparation. He did not transform the Eighth Army by personality alone, and the later myth of one man saving the Desert War can be misleading. What changed was the combination of command clarity, time, training, logistics, and confidence, all brought together at a moment when the Army desperately needed order. If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore. Montgomery was not an unknown figure when he reached Egypt, but he was not yet the public symbol he would become. He was a professional soldier, shaped by the First World War, by staff work, and by a strong belief that battles should be prepared carefully before men were committed. He could be difficult, stubborn, and intensely self-assured, but in the crisis of 1942, those qualities had military value. The Eighth Army had experienced too many sudden changes of plan and too many withdrawals that blurred the line between maneuver and defeat. Montgomery's first contribution was to impose a simple expectation. The Army would not retreat from El Alamein. That statement was not magic, but it mattered because soldiers needed to believe that the line behind them had meaning and that their commanders intended to fight a controlled battle rather than improvise another escape. The command change came amid wider upheaval. Winston Churchill and the British High Command had lost patience with the pattern of disappointment in the desert. General Claude Auchinleck had stopped Rommel in July, a fact that deserves respect, but the political and military demand was now for a commander who could turn defense into victory. Montgomery replaced the intended new Army commander, William Gott, who was killed when his aircraft was shot down before he could take up the post. That accident of war helped shape the campaign in ways no planner could have designed. Montgomery arrived with the advantage of a battlefield already stabilized by Auchinleck's earlier stand, but he also arrived with the responsibility to build on it. His success would depend on recognizing what July had revealed and refusing to repeat its mistakes. The most immediate change was mental. Armies are not machines that respond only to orders and fuel. They are communities under stress, full of rumors, habits, grievances, pride, and fear. The Eighth Army included British, Australian, New Zealand, South African, Indian, and other forces, and these formations had their own histories and expectations. Some had fought hard and felt mishandled. Some had seen successful infantry attacks fail because armor or anti-tank support did not arrive in time. Some had watched tank brigades lose strength in charges against concealed guns. Montgomery set out to create a shared belief that the next battle would not be a gamble. He worked to make the Army feel that it was being prepared for a deliberate victory, not thrown once more into confusion. That preparation began with command discipline. Montgomery wanted clear lines of authority, clear objectives, and a clear refusal to let subordinate formations fight separate private battles. In the desert, where distances were wide and communications could fail, this was especially important. A corps commander, division commander, or brigade commander who acted on outdated assumptions could unintentionally unravel a larger plan. Montgomery therefore emphasized unity of purpose. He wanted the infantry, armor, artillery, engineers, and air forces to understand their roles before the battle began. This did not remove friction from combat, because no commander can do that. It did, however, reduce the chance that the Eighth Army would repeat the earlier pattern, in which one arm advanced while another arm was absent, late, or unaware of what had happened. The change was especially important for the armored formations. British tank units had often been brave, but bravery had not solved the problem of fighting against a skilled enemy who integrated tanks with anti-tank guns and artillery. Too often, British armor had been treated as the instrument that would restore a failing situation by charge or countercharge. Montgomery was determined to husband armor more carefully and commit it within a broader system. Tanks would still be central to the coming battle, but they would not be asked to perform miracles in uncleared minefields or against well-sighted guns without infantry and artillery support. This was one of the great lessons of the Western Desert. A tank is powerful when it moves in a coordinated system. Alone, it can become an expensive target. Training was another weapon Montgomery took seriously. Time at El Alamein was not empty waiting. It was used to rehearse movement, improve procedures, prepare artillery plans, coordinate engineers, and teach units how the coming battle was supposed to work. The Eighth Army had to learn how to attack through minefields, how to mark lanes, how to manage traffic in darkness, and how to keep supplies moving once the first objectives were reached. These details may sound less dramatic than tank duels, but they were often the difference between success and failure. At Ruissaut and Materia in July, infantry had seized ground and then suffered because the rest of the battle system did not arrive properly. Montgomery's army had to make that sequence more reliable. Logistics lay underneath everything. By late summer 1942, British strength in Egypt was growing, and the Allied supply position was far better than Rommel's. Tanks, guns, trucks, ammunition, fuel, and aircraft were accumulating behind the line. Yet accumulation alone did not equal fighting power. Supplies had to be organized, moved, stored, protected, and made available at the right time and place. A deliberate offensive required ammunition dumps close enough to feed artillery, fuel reserves sufficient for armored operations, workshops ready to repair vehicles, and recovery units able to bring damaged tanks back into service. Montgomery understood that material superiority had to be converted into battlefield method. The Eighth Army would win not because it possessed more equipment in the abstract, but because it would prepare that equipment for a sustained battle. Air power also became part of the new confidence. The Desert Air Force increasingly gave the Eighth Army an advantage that earlier British forces had not always enjoyed so consistently. Aircraft could attack Axis supply routes, disrupt movement, observe the battlefield, and reduce Rommel's freedom to shift forces by day. Air superiority did not mean that every German or Italian movement was stopped, and it did not remove the need for hard ground fighting. Still, it changed the balance of the campaign. Rommel's army was already strained by distance and shortages, and air attack made those strains worse. For Montgomery, this meant that the coming battle could be prepared as a joint effort, with ground operations and air operations reinforcing each other rather than existing as separate campaigns. Montgomery's relationship with time was one of the defining features of his command. Rommel had often thrived when the tempo was fast and the British were forced to react under pressure. Montgomery wanted to slow the decision until he was ready, then fight on terms that favored the Eighth Army's strengths. This was not always admired by those who wanted immediate action, and critics later argued that he was cautious. But at El Alamein, caution was not the same as passivity. Montgomery used delay to improve the odds before battle. He waited for tanks, trained formations, built supply reserves, strengthened artillery plans, and ensured that the army understood its mission. In armored warfare, tempo is not merely speed. It is the ability to act at the moment and rhythm that best serve the plan. The arrival of Montgomery also affected how the enemy was understood. Rommel remained a formidable commander, and British soldiers knew it. His reputation had been built on real achievements: speed, tactical sharpness, and an ability to exploit hesitation. But reputations can become weapons in themselves, and the Eighth Army had to stop treating Rommel as almost supernatural. Montgomery's style helped reduce that psychological advantage. He insisted that the enemy could be beaten if the British and Commonwealth forces fought a disciplined, prepared battle. This did not mean underestimating Axis skill. It meant placing Rommel inside a material and operational reality. His army was tired, short of fuel, vulnerable to air attack, and constrained by the geography of El Alamein. The British task was to exploit those facts methodically. It is important not to turn Montgomery's arrival into a simple heroic legend. The Eighth Army had already been saved from destruction before he took command. The geography of El Alamein already favored defense. British industry, American production, Allied shipping, intelligence work, and air power all contributed to the army he commanded. Australian, New Zealand, Indian, South African, and British troops had already paid heavily for lessons that Montgomery would use. His achievement was not creating strength from nothing. It was giving existing and growing strength a clearer shape. He supplied confidence, discipline, and a plan at a moment when those things were themselves forms of combat power. That distinction makes the story more truthful and more interesting than myth. Montgomery's arrival belongs in the larger history of armored warfare because it shows that mechanized war was never only about machines. By 1942, tanks had become faster, better armed, and more numerous than their First World War ancestors. But the decisive problem remained coordination. The Eighth Army needed infantry to seize ground, engineers to open minefields, artillery to suppress defenders, aircraft to isolate the battlefield, and logistics to keep the whole structure moving. Montgomery's command style reflected that maturing understanding. He did not seek a romantic armored charge across the desert. He prepared a set-piece battle designed to break into, wear down, and then rupture a fortified enemy line. That approach pointed toward a more modern version of armored warfare, where mobility was released only after preparation had made it possible. By the end of August, the Eighth Army was no longer the same force that had fled from Tobruk. It still had weaknesses, and it had not yet proved it could defeat Rommel in a major offensive. But its mood had changed, its line was firmer, and its commander had turned preparation into a kind of weapon. Montgomery's arrival did not end the Desert War, and it did not guarantee victory. What it did was give the army a new expectation of control. The men at El Alamein were being told, through orders, training, supply, and example, that the next battle would be fought deliberately, and that retreat was no longer the assumed answer to crisis. Before the Eighth Army could attack in October, it first had to believe that it could stand. Montgomery's first victory was making that belief plausible.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.